record this. Let me try. Oh, there we go. Hey, it's just when I asked. Okay, it's English 1010 at Tennessee Tech. Mr. Smith, all credit for this talk goes to the online writing lab at Purdue University, owl.english.purdue.edu. It's a great website you all should be familiar with. So shout out to the fine folks at OWL. Some of the technology involved in conducting an interview has been made so much easier in the last couple of years, and I want you guys to take advantage of the technology that you have at your disposal and that you feel comfortable with. But the spirit and the ethics of doing a good job with an interview still apply. So the basic concept of why we do an interview, it's a great technique. It's primary research. It helps you get out of your comfort zone. It teaches you new skills. It also gives you an opportunity to build somebody up, flatter them, and learn all about them. So all the basic principles go back to even when it was like William Miller with his handheld tape recorder, or with a journalist with a pen pad and a pen and a notepad. But whether you're using Facebook Messenger or Google Chat or Google Meeting or Zoom Meeting or FaceTime or any other number of technological things, or the voice memo on your phone or the laptop camera on your computer, there are just so many different ways that you can technologically get a good, solid interview. But this is very important. This is primary research. Research is not just looking stuff up on the internet. Research is not just watching a YouTube video or going to a Wikipedia site or even going over to the library, old school, and reading a book out of the library. Research is actually investigating. In many of your other disciplines that you have here at the university, and the scientific disciplines, field research is just a common thing that we do. I have friends that go into streams and creeks all over Tennessee and study all the critters that live in the creeks and streams of Tennessee. It's just a thing that we do. People who go and study plants and biology and animals, and people who get into the laboratory. We have a new laboratory science building here at the university where people do firsthand research. Well, that's all you're doing, field research, firsthand research with a human being who's going to share their wisdom, knowledge, and expertise with you, and hopefully their humor and their spirit as well. So the 4 stages of doing a successful interview for this class are setting up the interview, and you guys have already begun that process this week. Preparing for the interview, which is coming up with your questions, which are due this Friday via email to me. Finally, meeting with the interviewee by whatever means you choose to interview with them, and then following up on your interview. These are the 4 phases of the interview process. I'm going to go over them briefly and succinctly, and then I will stop the recording and see if anybody has any questions. But this is a required component of Project 3, the profile. The purpose of the profile is not the interview itself. The interview is the research that goes into the good profile. The good profile will create a dominant impression where you can gain a strong idea about the topic and the person being interviewed. Setting up the interview involves contacting that potential interviewee in advance. If it's somebody you already know, you've already texted them or called them. If you're going to go and ask somebody you only have a professional relationship with, then it's very, 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 very important that you find out how to get a hold of them. Maybe they have an office phone, probably email. If you're doing somebody here at Tech, using your Tech email to their Tech email, and you can find them on the Tech website. That is probably the best way to reach out to a potential interviewee that you do not know personally. Otherwise, you can text them just like you always have. Then you need to arrange a specific time and place when the interview is going to take place, and whether that's going to be in person or using a virtual meeting platform. Or if you're going to write out your questions via email and send them those questions, you need to let them know how many questions it's going to be, how much time you're expecting them to commit to that interview, and what time you need to get those interviewee questions back. If you have a first draft due, say you're doing one of the first workshops, say you're at the workshop on October 13th, you can't ask for those interview questions to come after the interview paper is due, right? The profile paper is due. So you want to schedule your interview during next week when you're not meeting with me in class, except for your 15-minute required midterm. Next week is the perfect time to do the interview. Get the interview questions and topic done by Friday. Do the interview sometime next week. Make sure that you let them know your angle that you're going to be approaching. So you're going to ask them for an amount of time. For a live interview, whether it's in person or conducted virtually, like we conduct our class virtually, don't ask for more than a 30-minute interview. You will get more content than you need in a 30-minute interview. And you also want to be very respectful of their other time commitments. If you're doing a live interview, 30 minutes is the recommended time amount. And so keeping in mind, if you're expecting them to type answers over email for that interview, if that's the medium that you choose, make sure that you don't write more questions than would take them 30 minutes to reply. Prepare your list of questions in advance. I'm not going to respond individually to all of those emails I get on Friday, but if I notice interview questions that look problematic, I will fire off a quick response to you and let you know that you might want to write better questions. We're looking for open-ended questions. These are prompts more than just questions that have a simple yes or no or brief factual answer. They are prompts, meaning they use verbs, command verbs that encourage the interviewee to talk at length about the topic that you are curious about. If you can find any background information out about the interview in advance, the more the better. I use the example of William Miller and the Rock Band. He knew everything there was to know about Stillwater long before he interviews them. You need to Google them. You need to look at their social media if they have a social media. You need to get as much information about them as you can. If they have a profession that you can observe them in, if you can watch them in action, if you can see them in their workplace already doing the things that they do, those kind of visual descriptions of the interviewee, just like you described your characters in your memoir, you can describe the interviewee in the profile. The sample profile on what the guy I like to call Professor Dumpster in your textbook is a great place to start. Prioritize your questions. Ask the most important questions first in a live interview. Come up with your goals for the interview in advance. This is guided by your angle and guided by the dominant impression that you believe you will be conveying to your audience. Remember, your audience is people like yourself, 18 to 25-year-old college students living in the Southeast. Getting your questions has to do with what you want to learn about. What do I want to know? What are the things that I'm most curious about that I want to find out about? You want your questions to lead the interviewee to discuss the things that you're curious about. Hopefully, none of your interview topics are even bordering on topics that could be considered to be offensive or controversial, but you definitely don't want to ask questions that are inappropriate. And there are profile subjects that aren't going to work. And we've talked about this in class. We don't do any profiles related to the Greek community, the fraternity and sorority community. That's just an area that, out of respect for those cultures and their privacy and for their traditions, it's not appropriate in a public venue like this to write about. We're not going to probably do anything that's involving anything illegal or criminal. Probably also aren't going to go and look into the law enforcement community out of the same reasons why. And if you're looking at somebody whose profession does involve sensitive or confidential materials, you want to lead the interviewee away from anything that would force them to violate confidentiality. If you're dealing with somebody who works in a caring profession, whether it be medical or psychological, you don't want them to talk about their clients or anything of that nature, except in the most general terms. Good questions lead to good answers. Bad questions get bad answers. Do you think there's a parking problem on campus? Discuss your view of the parking situation on campus. And I didn't even talk about that, but there is a whole new Office of Parking, and we're all getting emails from them every single day. So if you're stumped on a topic, man, there you go. It's built in and right into the slides today. Go to the parking authority. Go find out who's in charge of the new parking office at Tech. There's a lot of plans to change the parking situation at Tech. That would actually be a great paper. You could get it published in the Tennessee Tech Oracle, our student newspaper. So you want to ask good questions. Good questions get good answers. Bad questions get bad answers. Before you leave the interview process, it's always good to respond to make sure you're hearing them correctly. And of course, recording this is really the only way to go. I strongly discourage you from doing an interview where you're only jotting down answers. Either they're typing their answers, and so I've seen an interview conducted on live chat, like on a Facebook Messenger or a similar type chat app, but they're typing their answers. You can't misquote them if their answers are typed. And that can happen in real time. So that could have a chat interview could have the benefit of a real-time interview, so for spontaneity's sake, but the benefit of an email interview for accuracy's sake. That's the one big advantage of an email interview is accuracy. The bad advantage, or the disadvantage, I should say, of an email interview is you're not face-to-face, you're not having a back and forth. I imagine, though, an email interview, if you wanted it to, could conceivably take place over more than one email exchange. But again, you need to respect the time of your interviewee. You need to ask for the interview. You do not need to tell them that you're going to interview them. You need to ask their permission. You need to be kind and flattering, like William Miller is in our movie example. And again, recording the interview requires consent. So you need to make sure, if you are recording, that they know that you are recording. Please keep notes on the interview, but don't spend your time writing during a live interview. This is based on a live interview. Probably, if you're going to be using electronics to gather that for you, you should be able to get all of that without having to spend time writing everything down. But you probably do want to write some things down just in case the technology fails, or to help your brain stay present and focused. It's very easy to get distracted in these kinds of situations. You don't want to be daydreaming while your interviewee is talking. One of the advantages of a live interview is to be flexible, to see unexpected and new discoveries. If something new and valuable comes up in an interview, I did years ago have a student do an interview where the main angle of their interview changed because the interviewee brought up something that completely astonished and surprised the interviewer, and that ended up becoming the main topic. So there is a lot of advantages for a live interview setting, for spontaneity and for, the spirit, if you will, to show up, right, and move the conversation along in a particular way. Again, asking permission and getting consent at every juncture of this process is very important, including the required consent form, which you will be submitting as part of your grade. And allowing them to know in advance how much time it's going to take. I did have a bad experience once where the student did not really respect the time of the interviewee. The interviewee ended up refusing to do the interview. And they were stumped. They didn't have somebody, and I actually brainstormed with them topics, and I actually helped them get the interview. And so somebody was doing a favor, not to them, but to me. And so I ended up, kind of losing professional credibility and personal respect from that person because the students' questions were so over the top, where the interviewee felt like they were doing all the work and the interviewer wasn't doing their due diligence. So remember, get all the background information you need into it in advance and be incredibly respectful of the person's time. The rules of courtesy apply no matter what you're doing with this process. Always be sure to thank your interviewee orally and in writing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Flatter them in advance. Thank them at the back end of this. Type up your transcript and send it to them and let them look it over to make sure that you have represented them accurately. Give them a chance to review that. Keep in mind that unless you get nominated for a first-year writing award, you are not going to be sharing this publicly, or unless you do that on your own. But let them know that this is not for publication. This is for your classmates and for your professor. So remember, these are the steps to conducting a successful interview. Making contact to set up the interview, preparing thoroughly for the interview with questions and vetting those questions with me and with somebody else, meeting the interviewee or setting up the time when the email transaction is going to take place, and then following up with gratitude and thanks. It would never be wrong even to give a very modest gift of gratitude to the interviewee when the interview is concluded. And remember, you should probably use technology, but I've given you lots of examples of different kinds of technology to use, and it's your choice what technology you use. I am very excited to read your papers, but remember, the paper itself is not the transcript. It's not the I said this and she said that. The essay is a dominant impression of the person, and it's on a topic and an angle, not just restating the interview. It's not a story about how I did an interview. The sample papers and the field guide and that I've provided to you in the shared folder give you an example of how to write well on this topic. Papers that just restate the interview will not be successful. The interview is the source. The profile is the paper. I hope this has been helpful to you all, and I hope you will refer to this, to these notes as you go about doing your questions and your interview itself. So this concludes the